Welcome back to the channel. Today I'm doing a video on installing a Holley Terminator X into an LS series car. So the car that I have is kind of unique, but it's an '08 Grand Prix. They came with the LS4, so it's the front wheel drive version of an LS, and usually these come with a 4T65, but I have a 4T80 on here. It's technically the 4L80 variant, front wheel drive variant, and I have a Terminator X Max. It controls the transmission, it controls the engine. I do some special wiring since it is a front wheel drive application, but regardless, this troubleshooting and install video will work with all LSs. So it's going to go over wiring, it's going to go over troubleshooting. There were a few things that I found that were very important to know, and also we'll just go over the basics as well. And I think this would be a really good video for everybody that's trying to get one of these swapped in an LS, because going through the forums, and I went through the forums as well, it seems like a lot of people have issues. And my main issue with this install wasn't Holley's issue. It was because the injectors, a few of them were sticking open. So we'll go over that as well. And just, I would recommend, if you're putting a Terminator X onto an LS, I would recommend just getting a brand new set of injectors so you don't have to worry about the finicky old LS injectors sticking open. So the first thing I want to go over is Holley gives you this wonderful manual that you get with your Terminator X. I would really recommend reading this thoroughly before you install it. There's a lot of good information in here, and you can really just go step by step to get it installed. I'm going to pretty much use this manual for the beginning of wiring because it's a lot easier to show you through the manual and kind of come over here, because I have this 100% installed standalone because the harness isn't long enough to get in the car yet. So I'm waiting for an extension harness so then I can extend everything and make it really nice and luminant, just like I did to this part of the engine. So it'll just go back into the car. Since it's front wheel drive, it was too short to reach, or some stuff was too short to reach, and I didn't want to just have everything bunched up, kind of like it is now. Now I am going to go into wiring, and it's pretty simple. So you should have already installed your harness onto your engine, and it's really straightforward. Everything is very nicely labeled on the harnesses. The harnesses all have nice sheathing. This is really simple. I mean, your injector harness, it says what it is. One other thing before we go any further, when you install your harness, make sure that these grounds coming from the coil harness right here, mine's a little bit extended because it's on an LS4, is going directly to the back of the head on that side cylinder. Don't mount it to any of these bolts on the valve cover, because the valve cover aluminum, it might be aluminum, but it's not grounded, is not grounded. So it will not work right to the head. I stress this, I cannot stress this enough, directly to the head. And make sure you solder the connection if you have to modify the length of this wire. But Holley's harness bolts directly to the back of the head, no modifications. Back of the head, that's that again. So now we're gonna go to the wiring. As you can see, my ECU's on. This is 100% standalone installed. I have a lithium battery. It is nice and light. Cranks over the LS very nicely. And it's 560 cranking amps and 240 cold cranking. So it's not that strong, but it works. Not that big a deal. So now we're moving on to what connectors are what. So we have Terminator X, Terminator X Max, J1A, J1B, main power, J1A, J1B, main power. So this is the main power harness. Positive, negative, really simple. The only thing that goes from the ECU, from the main power on both of these, is those two wires. It is very straightforward. Then we have J1A, J1B on both of these, and that is the engine harness going to the ECM. Also wires coming off of it for powers and grounds, as you can see right here. Right here, this is those two plugs, and these are the connections that you have to make. Very straightforward, very simple. One thing to note is the engine harness and the transmission harness share a lot of the same similar colored wires. So if you're doing a Terminator X Max, make sure to wire them at the same time, because then you don't have to go back and add the same wires and cut stuff and splice it. So I'd recommend soldering everything. I would recommend getting a Weller soldering iron, some adhesive lined heat shrink, and some nice low temp solder, because the stuff at Home Depot is high temp for like plumbing, and it's way too high of a temp for wiring. It'll just mess all the wiring up. So really recommend soldering. It is the best connection. Well, unless you're using like a high-end super crimper, which nobody has. So recommend soldering, then you don't have to worry about any wiring gremlins or issues. But now, straightforward. We have 12-volt switch, red, white, 12-volt battery, red, connect to the battery as it says. Green is fuel pump, black is ground. In this TAC output, it's an LS. It comes off the crank sensor. You're not going to need it unless you're doing, I don't know, if you're doing something crazy, you might need it. But I don't have it connected, not needed. So coming over here, we can see I have this wire right here. It's actually orange now, but it's coming from the red, as you can see down here. Orange goes to red. This is the 12 volt going directly to the battery. Then we have my 12 volt switch, which would be the ignition switch. So I just have it as an alligator clip coming down here, and it goes to these two red whites. So one red white is coming from the engine harness, one red white is coming from my transmission harness. Also, that's really all you need to connect for the engine harness. I mean, there isn't much else. I mean, we have our ground. See, one's coming from the transmission, one's coming from the engine harness, going directly to ground on the battery, which I would recommend doing it directly to the battery so it's a nice clean ground. Then we have what we need to do with the transmission harness next. As I said before, the transmission wiring harness is also pretty straightforward. As you can see, we have our J4 connector, and you just plug that in, really simple. Then the plug plugs directly into a 4L80, 4T80, etc. Really straightforward. It's a very simple install. Then you have a brake switch. So this goes to your brake pedal, and you want to make sure this is installed, you know, as the ground. So you want 12 volts on one side of the brake pedal, and you want this installed on the other side. So then it sees 12 volts when you depress the brake pedal is the best way to do it. So that's how it wants it, and that's how you need to do it. So just pretty much do 12 volts on one side. Some, you know, I think all cars are kind of wired up that way, but since this was kind of a weird situation and I'd take all the wiring out of it, I just need to wire all that up to the brake pedal. Another reason why this isn't in the car yet. Then we have ground, black, which I already showed you. Power is red, which I already showed you. And switch power, which is red, white, which I already showed you. So not very difficult at all. It's very straightforward on this. So now the next thing, since you're using a Terminator X Max, if you're using the drive-by-wire throttle body, we're going to come to the next page, which is wiring for the drive-by-wire. Holley says do not modify this harness, which I'm going to have to modify mine, but as long as you know how to do it correctly, it's fine. But if you're doing it in a real-world drive application, you're not going to have to modify it, so don't worry about it. So it's pretty simple. You just connect it to the J3 connector, connect the other side to your throttle body, and then you have one wire to wire, which is the brake switch wire, this 12 volt right here. So you just connect it right to the brake switch, and make sure this is the first troubleshooting tip, and I'll reiterate this after I go to setting up the drive-by-wire throttle body, which we'll do in a second. Do not have, so if you have this brake pedal switch wired any way other than the brake pedal, or when you're doing the TPS set, do not hold the brakes down, and do not have this wire connected directly to 12 volts while you're trying to perform the TPS set. Now that I went over the drive-by wiring harness, make sure to read the rest of this manual. I'd still read the whole manual even though you're watching this video. There's quite a bit of information in here for setting up it through the handheld. And the first time, I would recommend getting a Windows-based laptop just because it's a lot easier to go into the ECM and actually set variables. The handheld works, but it's really small. It's very vague, and the laptop, you can change a lot more. Also, since I went from 58x crank with a 4 times cam to a 58 crank in a 1x cam, I had to use the custom settings on the laptop to change all those settings for the cam. So I would definitely recommend. Plus, you can see a lot more information at once, and you can log while you're cranking to see if you have any gremlins, etc. So now that we kind of went over this, I'm going to start off with the main thing. Well, we'll do it on the laptop, but we'll start setting variables in the laptop. And since mine is already set up, I will do one thing. I'll reset the TPS, or this drive-by-wire throttle body, incorrectly with the brake switch, so you guys can see what happens. You get into the TPS auto set function on the laptop. It's this little, almost looks like kind of like a recycle emblem. Click on that, TPS auto set. Okay. Make sure the ignition is on. You're gonna hit start. So now we're going to set you in the tripod. We have the drive-by-wire throttle body. It says depress it twice. Just go 1 and then 2. Hit done. For the throttle position setting, if you have the brakes depressed or the brake switch wire ran to a 12-volt source like I did in the beginning, as long as it says it's completed and it does the auto set correctly, you could disconnect that wire and you shouldn't have any issues. And how you verify that is you disconnect the wire or depress the brakes and the throttle body should move. It's going to take 2 people to do quite a few things in this, installing a Terminator X, but it's not that difficult. A few things you need, like when you first get started, you need somebody else possibly to look things over, to look at the laptop, to crank the car while you're watching the laptop, or vice versa. So other than that, then you have the TPS auto set done, and there isn't too much else to do. You want to get it in closed loop. Once you start cranking it, if you see that the sensors, so when I started this whole process, I had an issue with my crank and cam sensor syncing. And I did quite a bunch of flip-flop wiring, and it was kind of a pain to figure it out. But the reason being 58 times crank, 1x cam. Usually this comes with a 4x cam. So that was the issue. But I have a cam in here, and I have the 1x trigger wheel, because it was a Klotz kit that came from Texas Speed. For some reason, it came with the 1X cam gear. So I didn't want to pull the engine back out to fix it. So really, there isn't much you have to do. You don't have to rewire anything. All you have to do is come into the settings here, go to ignition parameters. Then from this drop down, you're supposed to set this. There's quite a few different ones. You can go back, you can go, you can go from their selection. If you just have the normal setup, if it's just a 24 LS 24 tooth, oh, this is touchscreen, I didn't know that. So if you have a 24 tooth, it's a 1X cam gear. 58 tooth, it is a 4X cam gear. So I have this set up as custom, and when you go into custom, you go to configure, and you want to have this, everybody says 20 to 24 USEX. I have it on 20 and it runs perfectly fine. Then down on the cam sensors. So this is what you're going to change if you have a 1X instead of a 4X, or you're trying to do it vice versa. And what you need to do here is actually set it to, I have it set to digital falling, and it works. But for some reason, a lot of people say to set it to digital rising, which is technically how it should be, but for some reason it works on mine on digital falling. So I'm not exactly sure why, but it works, it runs great. So I guess you're just gonna have to mess with this. Maybe, you know, some wires were reversed, but all the wiring is factory 4X. So there isn't, you know, it's still 5 volt on the front crank sensor or the front cam sensor, 5 volt on the crank sensor. So nothing has changed. None of the wiring from the LS2 harness has changed. Nothing has changed. So we have it on digital falling, and then down here on the output, so we're gonna do distributor coil unplug, and you want 3.5 milliseconds. So it depends on what coils you're using, but I'm using the LS2 coils, and that is what they're supposed to be at. So I just look at whatever coils you're using for reference, or if you're using aftermarket ones, they should tell you what it needs to be. 8 of these new flex fuel injectors. I'll put a link in the description. So I haven't flowed these ones that I have in my hand, but 2 previous sets flowed the exact same. So these are the flex fuel ones. Link will be in the description. I tried to see if these were leaking, but it kept popping an injector out when I applied fuel pressure, and I just got tired of having fuel everywhere. So we'll just throw these in. I think these injectors are fine, but when I did do fuel pressure for a second and then crank it, it looked like it was putting too much fuel out. I now have all 8 injectors back in, all the harnesses back on there. The one thing about these injectors on this intake manifold is they're a little bit too tall, which is kind of strange. I guess these ones were just, I guess they were quite a bit shorter. Me and Chris got the engine up and running and idling, but I went to fill the cooling system and I bought a new upper radiator hose, and I thought the lower one would have been fine, but it looks like somebody cut it with a box cutter. So I got a new radiator hose right here. Just need to throw it on and refill the cooling system, and it's gonna start self-tuning itself. The Holley Terminator X is really nice. I think all of Holley's line of ECUs self-tune. I'm not 100% sure, but I know the Terminator X and the Terminator X Max does, which is very nice because then you don't have to take it to a tuner. Really all you do is you put it in closed loop and it just starts learning. So you're going to take it for a drive, and you don't want to instantly start doing burn-offs and stuff with that. You want to get the table to actually self-tune the whole power band and do some nice pulls and driving and highway driving and highway pulls and stuff like that. So it tunes the fuel table, so there's going to be fuel there instead of it, you're trying to do a burn-off instantly and it's trying to tune while it's under like full load and doing all kinds of crazy stuff. You don't want that to be where it's trying to tune. Finished getting everything with the cooling system hooked back up. I didn't end up having enough coolant though. I'm like 3 gallons of coolant in there, but get some more. At least it has some coolant in it. All this is hooked up. I have the steam ports connected to each other now. They just tee in right here and then go into the top of that, which is really nice. And the new radiator hose is now down there and not leaking, which is very, very, I'm very happy about that. Yeah. So now we have no leaks. We have coolant, we have tranny fluid, we have oil. I need to change the oil because it has a lot of fuel in it, but we should be able to get this thing idling. I also panel bonded this hole because it backfired through the intake one time, and since it's an electronic throttle body, it just blew that. It was like a plug, so it just blew that off, and it just needed to be plastic welded or panel bonded, whatever. But some cam. Sounds good. just left and we got everything sorted on the Grand Prix. So she starts up and idles finally. So I haven't taken it for a first drive because I need transmission fluid and I need to clean up this wiring. So I'm going to do that in the next video, but it's really nice to finally have this thing so it starts up and idles on its own and actually to hear it with the camshaft. So one thing I'm going to recommend is when you're starting this up, if you do go with a different map sensor, there's a few things that you want to make sure of. So on the map table, you want to make sure this barrel right here, see how it's 86.3, that's on the ECM. And then the map should be relatively close to that. If it's not, mine was reading around 20. So what happened was I ended up using the LS3 style sensor, which they do have a harness, but I just wired it in. So I had two wires backwards. So how these wires go, here we'll kind of line them up. So there's a gray wire and that goes to orange. There's a red wire that goes to green on the other side. And then this black goes to the center. So I just had two wires flip-flopped and it was just dumping fuel in this. Also, other than it dumping fuel, it had a few stuck injectors. We finally got it started up after everything was wired up correctly. And then the oil, it didn't show it on the dipstick. I checked the oil. It didn't look like there was that much fuel in there. But then we drained the fuel, or yeah, technically it was pretty much fuel. So we drained the oil, but it was pretty much like 50% oil, 50% fuel. So the car doesn't smoke, which is nice. So I don't think there's any damage to the engine, but there was a lot of fuel. We ran it probably for 5 minutes like that. And then when we shut it off, it sounded like you pour a bucket of water down like some stairs or something. But now it's good to go. New oil, everything is good. Just need transmission fluid and to tuck this wiring and stuff up. And also I need to wire the fans. So the ECM controls the fans. So I'll have to put two relays, get all that wired up and good to go so we can have fans working as well, because I just kind of have them hot wired right now just to keep this thing cool, which it does have a 160 degree thermostat. And the self-tuning function actually works pretty well. So you want to put this in, since I have a drive-by-wire, if you have a drive-by-wire, you want to just put it in drive-by-wire mode. So then it'll actually idle. In this section, this is your self-tuning table. So you want to have it in closed loop. And then this is where it learns, and it shows you it's adjusting fuel. You'll have all of these highlighted and it'll populate it. But after you're done, you want to hit transfer learning to base. So that's how you get everything that it learns onto your base fuel map. So if you don't do that, it's not going to transfer the file, and then you're just going to lose it, which is not a good thing, because then you have to start all over from scratch. So besides the baro matching the map or being very, very relatively close, that's another thing. Chris figured this out, but to get the car to idle, this is the throttle position percentage. So you go over here to this pedal right here, click down, it's pedal versus throttle, gets you this right here. If you have this at 0 and it sets it automatically at 0 when you do the TPS or the drive-by-wire, the throttle position learning procedure, which is, I believe, right here, TPS auto set. When you do that, it zeroes all this out, or not all of it, but it starts at 0 and then goes up to 100%. But if you have it at 0, it's not going to idle. It's not going to want to idle because it needs some throttle position so it will idle. So you have to adjust this. And then Chris came in here and he found, you go to this white gauge up here, and idle speed is this right here. And this is how you set your idle speed. So I have it all 870. I'm probably gonna flatten it out, but it's target idle speed for coolant temperature, and it goes all the way up. So we should be good now, which is really nice, because really all that's left is, like I said, I need more tranny fluid. There's a leak. There's one of the hoses that are leaking. That's why I don't really want to get this driving today, because this is at like 210 degrees Fahrenheit, and It's like 60 degrees outside. It's probably gonna take forever. Plus I'm almost ready to go home because it's gonna start getting dark out. So I need to go to the store. When I go home, get that stuff, let it cool down, fix that leak, tuck all this wiring up, and probably when we take it for a test drive, I'll just have, you know, Chris in the passenger seat or something, just controlling the throttle, because this will reach into the passenger side for now until we get all this wiring moved. I also got the fans connected, so it will, so I could put them on a switch and it'll actually have the cooling fans going, so we're not going to overheat or anything like that. I need to also put an air filter on this thing, and I need to come and cap this off right here. So this used to go to this right here, which is the coming from the gas tank, like evap stuff, which I'm going to delete anyway. So I need to cap that off. But other than that, she's working. I'm really excited, and I'm really happy that this thing finally is almost going to move under its own power. So you can see everything powers up right there, no issues. And then we come over here and we go, and I'm just going off the alternator power, but so now she starts up. And what you're gonna do now, so I've already started this before, but what you're gonna do now is try to get this thing to start. You may have to have a friend hold the throttle, but if you are in the self-tuning table, so you come over here to the little fuel injector, and then you're gonna go to the learn table, and we'll connect the ECM right now because it's not actually connected. And you can see that it's gonna start populating this region. And as it gets to that spot, it's gonna start tuning the fuel ratio off of the wideband and just get it so it idles really nice. Let me shut this off really quick. So we shut her off, and that's my ignition switch. It needs to be connected so I have power. So as you can see, this is the area that it populated because that's where it was just idling at. So you wanna go up here, and my friend Chris actually found this out. You need to go transfer learning to base. And what this does is it transfers it to your fuel map and makes these where it self-tuned it, and it corrects those. So you also want to smooth the fuel table with these learned values. So everything is nice and, you know, it doesn't have like a huge peak because it's actually smoothing it. And as you go and drive this thing around, you'll notice that, you know, it's gonna tune this whole series. And then once you get this all the way tuned through, you know, I just start, you know, cruising around, nice light load, and then just kind of go up in the RPM, go cruise it on the highway, and then start, as you populate more and more of this, and then start going into, you know, going and getting in the higher RPMs and start ripping it, but don't just go full out in the beginning because you'll end up having issues, you'll blow up your engine. This is a very useful thing because you can actually get your car to tune very well. This function works very, very well. But I'm gonna end the video here. If you like these videos, make sure to click the subscribe button, throw a thumbs up, throw a comment below. As always, see you guys next time.